Do you ever catch yourself boasting about your accomplishments, crediting your talent, your hustle, and your sheer will for every success? In a world that relentlessly champions the self-made myth, it's easy to fall pride, reorient your perspective, and unleash a transformative appreciation for God's boundless grace. Join me as we unpack this foundational passage and discover why acknowledging our undeserved blessings is crucial for walking in true freedom and fulfilling God's purpose for our lives. We'll be right back. Hey everyone, welcome back to Word Time. I'm Coach Shaw with Coach for Christ, coming to you with a message I've titled Undeserved Blessings. I'm coming out of Deuteronomy 9 verses 1 through 6. I stumbled on this a little over a month ago, and sometimes I struggle with the messages that I end up choosing to do because a lot of them are not spur of the moment. They are something that I have to look at and see. It's something that I hear, and then I'm like, hey, that applies to a lot. Trying to find something that applies to what we can do nowadays and how we deal with things and things like that. And so I try to plan them out, and then this kind of message, when I'm studying it actually went a few different directions for me. So it took me a little while to get it all together, but here it is, and it's called Undeserved Blessings. Deuteronomy 9, for those who have read it before, remember, is basically Moses is giving the Israelites basically a talking to and a reminder that they're not special. They don't deserve what they're about to get. We're about to enter the promised land, and you didn't do anything to deserve it. Quite honestly, the contrast would be that the only reason that they're getting it, one, is it was promised to their ancestors, but two, and a big part of this theme in this passage is that the Canaanites were so evil that they were getting it taken away from them. So, you can apply that to a lot in our lives, a lot in the Bible. Thinking about what comes to my mind, the parable of the talents and the wicked servant that doesn't do what he is supposed to do with what he is given. So you can kind of contrast that. The Canaanites were given this land at one point because even if it's an evil people, that's not a godly people. We all know in Romans 13, we're supposed to respect the governing authorities, even if they're against what we believe. We didn't vote for them. God has put them in that place. All right. He has allowed them to be in that place for a reason. Now, obviously you can get into a whole debate on free will and God's sovereignty and all that stuff, but we know God's sovereign and we know we have free will. So there's something in there with all that, but God allows things. And even though it might not be his will, he can still get his purpose out of it. That's why he's God. He can still work all things, Ephesians 1, out of accordance of his will. Okay. He can take what we give him and he can still bless it. He could still adapt it. He can maneuver. And I say maneuver as if he is having to dodge something that happens and he wasn't expecting. He knows what's going to happen. He's sovereign. We know that. But he takes our mess and he can fix it. So regardless, the Canaanites were given this land originally. All right. They drove out the original inhabitants. They conquered it themselves, and God gave them a time to basically ensure that their iniquity was full. All right, and we'll get into that just in a little bit. But the concept behind this lesson is that the Israelites were getting something. They were being blessed with something that they did not deserve. and how much in our lives, when you're younger, hopefully when you're younger, not nowadays anymore, but when you're younger and you just, you think that you earned something, this job, this position. I know as a young coach, and this is Coach for Christ, right? So a lot of these analogies for me are coaching in the coaching world and education. When you're young, you think you're on top of the world and that you're the reason for success, and that if you go to a place that you'll change it just because you're special. And any coach that has matured past that point, they understand what I'm talking about. If you're a coach and you don't understand what I'm saying there, you still have not matured to the point where it's not all about you. Okay, and the bottom line is you've been given a gift, a calling. God has called you, as Coach Shelby has said the last few weeks. Many are called, but few are chosen. God has called you to do something that's not winning football games. He hasn't called you to win football games. He's called you to reach kids. He's called you into your ministry. Well, you have your ministry of your family, but your second ministry is to that of those kids that you're in charge of. Okay. And you will be held to account one day. I mean, one of the scariest things I ever thought of was all the teams that I had, all the different players that I've coached that I built them up with good character and things like that, but I sure wasn't preaching Christ till later on in my career. And there's no rock with character building. Character building is good. There's nothing against that, but it's just like a 12-step program. It's just like going to a counselor, psychiatrist. It all has its place, but it cannot replace Christ and the rock that we stand on. Otherwise, everything else is sinking sand. Okay. So, reiterating in our lives that we're not too proud, that we don't boast in something that we've accomplished because we didn't accomplish it. God gave it to us to accomplish, and he gave it to you not to glorify in you. He gave it to you so that you could glorify him by using it as a vessel. Okay. Whether that's a coaching position, a different job, whatever the case is, he's given you that opportunity to profess his son. Okay. And that's what we're missing here. So don't think it's about you. And like in some respects, like in this passage right here in Deuteronomy 9, the Israelites were getting it in a large part because of something their ancestors did, or something that God did for their ancestors. But the other main part is because of the evil that God was running out of the land. Had nothing to do with them. Okay. Had nothing to do with merit or anything that they accomplished. All right. Just to start out, again, this is Deuteronomy 9. We're going to do verses 1 through 6, but I just wanted to summarize chapter 8 that happens right before this. And those who know, Deuteronomy is basically a summary of what happened to the Israelites throughout the history right before they go into the promised land. Joshua is obviously the next book of the Bible and they take over. But in Deuteronomy 8, and I'm just going to summarize this as we go, basically, if you obey, you'll be allowed into the promised land. Okay, there's a two-part thing. It's not just you're getting it because, all right, I didn't profess that I'm an Israelite, so I'm getting in. All right, think about that for our timeline. All right, I profess Jesus as my Savior, so I'm good to go. No, okay, it says if you obey, you will be allowed in. Okay, if you obey, you will be allowed to stay in. And guess what? The Israelites did not obey, so they got kicked out. They got exiled, just like with our faith can happen to us. All right, this is obviously Coach for Christ. We don't believe in once saved, always saved. We've said that repeatedly. Okay. Verse 2, remember God provided for you throughout the wilderness. All right. God did this, not you. You did not do anything to get through all that time. Okay. And we can, again, comparing the wilderness to our sin nature, to us going through hard times, things like that. God got us through it, not us. There's not anything we can do. You were humbled and fed manna, so you'd lean on God, not food. All right. Prayer, supplication, church, what we're leaning on instead of material things like football wins if I'm a coach. Okay. Your clothes didn't wear out. Your feet didn't swell. God took care of you. And anyone who's really been through something, God got you through a lot, and you can only explain it in a supernatural way. I know when I got saved and born again, you know, I was baptized when I was young, and I went to church my whole life until the middle portion of my first marriage, and really strayed away. And then when I came back, there are so many things that happened in that time period that I can't explain any other way than a supernatural thing. This is not something that I did and I got through by myself. You can't do it. I'm not convinced that people who go through a divorce or other type of tragedy, I'm not convinced you can actually get through it on your own. And that's why there's so many that stay suffering throughout, because they don't lean on God. Right. I felt that more than I've ever, I was talking to my wife about that the other day when I went to divorce care, which is basically like a um, Alcoholics Anonymous for divorced people. Okay. I was not the quiet type. I was the one that thought, man, I really went through something and I'm going to share this. And you get in that room with a bunch of people who are heartbroken and are going through the worst time of their life and no one wants to talk about it. They're just sad. And I'm sitting here like, hey, I'll talk about it. And I'll never forget that first time I went. And, it's like, I've never been to an AA meeting, but I imagine it's kind of the same way. Hey, I'm John. Here's my story. And I'm telling my story. And what I realized soon after is that, one, my story was not near as bad as I thought it was. There were a lot of other worse stories, worse divorce stories, worse tragic, just abuse, all kinds of worse things than I was dealing with. Okay. So it gave me perspective on that. But two, I did nothing for 6 straight months but read and read the Bible and pray. I mean, I was probably the worst teacher of all time during those 6 months because I just dove into God and I just embraced everything and I was so immersed in it. I don't even remember what else happened during that time period. And if not for that, I know I wouldn't have got through it like I did. And there's still scars. I'm not saying it's all over, but there's so much in there that you can't. I mean, there's a reason people suffer. There's a reason depression, anxiety is rampant because people don't turn to God. Turn to God and he will save you. He will give you that peace. Not he won't take it away. There's some things God takes away, but there's a lot of stuff he lets you have. Your crosses to bear, your thorn in the flesh, because it helps you to lean on him. Just like the manna, it makes you lean on him and make you know that you're not doing this on your own. I receive the manna so that I can get my nourishment from him. God disciplines you because he loves you. Anyone with a brain cell knows discipline equals love. Okay. There's a difference in discipline and abuse, but discipline could mean physical discipline. It could mean spiritual. It could mean verbal. It could mean a lot of things. All right. But there's a huge difference between discipline and abuse, and those that abuse discipline and what it means. All right. Discipline means love. You love people that you discipline. Okay. Obey God by walking in his ways. There's the second obey. All right. You can't just go in. You're not just in because of who you are or what your nationality is. You got to obey. Okay, God's bringing you to a great land of milk and honey, plenty of food, copper and iron is plentiful. Praise God for all the food in the good land. Be careful. Number 3, the third time, be careful you don't forget God or his commandments. That's in verse 11 in chapter 8. You'll have nice houses and be prosperous. You'll have large flocks and herds. Don't become proud and forget what God has given you when he led you out of Egypt. 4 types of obedience in this chapter. God led you through all the dangers of the wilderness, fed you manna again to humble you, reminding you again to be humble. Did all this for you so you couldn't brag that you accomplished this all by yourself. Remember God because your success is because he is fulfilling his covenant to your ancestors, not because of you. And we'll get into the chapter. Chapter 8:19, if you forget God, you will be destroyed. There's five ways that you have to obey what you have to do or else. Okay. The Bible is riddled with do this or else. Okay. Only people who want to fabricate an existence where you don't have to do anything, you don't have to work to sustain your faith. All right. James 2:24, all right? It's not just based off faith alone, okay? You can twist it however you want, but the Bible is clear if you just read it, okay? And I had an argument with a guy, one of the comments we had, anytime we get a video that gets like over 500 views, a short or whatever, a reel, man, we people just out of the woodwork, they're just coming to attack. And this one guy today, he's attacking us for believing in pre-tribulational rapture. Like, obviously, we don't believe in that. He just wanted to win an argument, okay? Verse 19, if you forget God, you'll be destroyed. And then verse 20, God destroyed other nations in your past, so he'll destroy you as well. Okay, just like a parallel to Romans 11, verse 17. But some of these branches from Abraham's tree, some of the people of Israel have been broken off. And you Gentiles who were branches from a wild olive tree have been grafted in. Okay, you weren't part of this, now you are. The ones who were part of it aren't. All right? Oh, that Coach Shaw, they were never really saved. Then get out of here with that stuff. All right? That's not what it's saying. Right? They were a part of the tree. Well, they weren't really a part. They were part of the tree. What do you mean they weren't part of it? They were on the tree. They were a part of the tree and they got cut off. What do you mean they weren't part of it? So now you also receive the blessing God has promised Abraham and his children, sharing in the rich nourishment from the root of God's special olive tree. But you must not brag about being grafted in to replace the branches that were broken off. You were just a branch, not the root. Don't brag about this. Okay? You didn't do it. God did it. But then, okay, if God did that, so God tore them off the branch? No. Okay? You rebel. You don't obey. 5 times in Deuteronomy 8 that you have to obey. You have to do this or else. Okay, if you don't do this, you will get broken off of the tree. Verse 19, well, you may say those branches were broken off to make room for me. Yes, but remember, those branches were broken off because they didn't believe in Christ, and you were there because you do believe. So don't think highly of yourself, but fear what could happen. For if God did not spare the original branches, he won't spare you either. Okay, again, not about you, but there's plenty you can do to mess up. All right, have faith. Faith is the first God's calling our faith in response to that. Right. And then we got to sustain. We have to persevere. The Bible, again, is riddled with passages about persevering, staying in the faith, do this, obey or else, blah, blah, blah. The or else part is getting broken off. Okay. The Israelites were God's chosen people. That's what this example in Romans 11 is about. They were his chosen people. They were originally part of the covenant because of the promise to Abraham. Now, that was the Abrahamic, the Mosaic covenant. All right. Now we're in the new covenant. Right. Now it's about Christ, responding to Christ's call, answering his call, obeying his call. And you are grafted in as a Gentile now to God's tree that used to have only Israelites on it. The Israelites were broken off for a reason. You can be broken off as well. I just read that. Okay, so that's kind of the background with chapter 8 and why this passage in chapter 9 was needing to take place. Okay, but a couple of things I wanted to touch on before because of the parallels that this has with modern times and nowadays the struggles we deal with. There's 4 points I wanted to make before we get into it. Number one, the emphasization of God's sovereign power and faithfulness. Okay, the Israelites going into the promised land, they were told that they would face insurmountable odds. All right, and we're going to get into that. Obviously, if you know the Bible at all. But the thing is God had already declared the victory. Again, like we said before, there is a balance between free will and God's sovereignty. All right, there are plenty of people in the world that negate one or the other. Okay, you have the Calvinists who negate free will and say God's sovereign over everything, controls everything, but that makes him the author of sin. They try to, do mental gymnastics around that. Okay, and then the other side of the fence would be what's called open theism. All right, and that's where God, in their minds, God doesn't have exhaustive knowledge. Like he can still be kind of surprised by things, which we don't believe, obviously. So of course, someone will hear that little snippet in a short or a reel, and they'll be like, "Oh my God, he's an open theist." Yeah, okay. Anyway, but they believe in free will. Open theists do. So it's the opposite side of Calvinism. They don't believe that God is truly sovereign. Okay, because there's so many in the world that are trying to figure out what these two facets of theology mean, and they just can't comprehend that they both can happen at the same time. God can be sovereign because they don't understand sovereignty, while free will can still happen. People can make choices, and you can still be sovereign over that. Okay, you can allow choices. Like a king, medieval times, a monarch, they were called a sovereign. Why? Because they were the end authority, not because they meticulously controlled everything like a puppeteer. They were the end authority. They were sovereign over all. Our God is obviously supernatural and can control things. He sometimes intervenes to stop things or to create things, to make things happen, but he twists every human decision into the purpose that he wants, and he gives us a path. And sometimes, I kind of always compare it this way. When you get married to the wrong person, that's not God's path for you. Okay. If you have a straight line path for your life, that's not God's path. So you veered off. Okay. But now God will use the path that you've chosen, which would be wrong. All right. And in the New Testament, it talks about you're not supposed to divorce an unbeliever that you're married to. Okay. It doesn't mean you can just say, forget that, and I'm going to go find me another believer. Okay. You have to stay as you are. Coach Shelby hit on that a couple of weeks ago. All right. But now you're on a different path, but God is going to steer you back to the path he wants you on. All right. But again, you have choices to make in here, and God will continue to prompt you using the Holy Spirit to get you back on the track he wants, even despite your messes. Now, your messes will cause consequences for you. Okay. I deal with consequences. It's a struggle to raise kids in a split home. It is. All right. Those are consequences. I took the wrong path originally. God has brought me back to his path, but I have on that other path, I have a lot of issues that I have to deal with still on my good path, if that makes sense. Okay. And your whole life is like that. Your whole life is a pathway. God is trying to steer you back on the right path. Okay. So anyway, God is sovereign. He's already declared the victory for the Israelites, just like in your life. He's declared the victory for Christ in your life. We already know how the story ends. The matter is, what are we doing in the meantime to accept the calling we've been given to save other souls? All right. And yourself. Obviously, you have to persevere and obey. It's not just, hey, I believe in Jesus, I'm good to go for life. We don't believe that here, obviously. Okay. Number 2, preventing pride. The Israelites weren't worthy of anything. God was actually cleansing the land of wickedness as opposed to rewarding the Israelites. Okay. 2 things. I said this before. The Israelites' ancestors were promised this land. Okay. In the Abrahamic covenant with God. And then 2, God was trying to root out all the evil in the land. Okay. And we'll get into what that actually means here in just a little bit. But this was not something the Israelites did. And this is what got caught up in biblical times when Jesus was around. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, they believed they were special because of who they were. Okay. When they were only special because God blessed them, because God chose them. That's it. And we have to remember that in not only our spiritual walks, but in our material walks too. We didn't get a job because we're special. All right. We didn't get a job because we obeyed God. We didn't get a job because we were honorable and did things right. We got a job for a purpose. And there's a lot of times that there's human free will involved in that, and people don't hire the right person. Say you're the right person for a job. They may not hire you. You might be pushed somewhere else. Okay. God wants you on this path, but that human will, that human free will sneaks in there. And now whether it's something that you did or not, now you veered off the path God had for you, but you're obedient. So God is going to put you back on the path that is best for what his purpose is for you. Okay. And again, what are you doing with your talents? Are you hiding them in the closet? Are you burying them in the ground because you're worried about something? Or are you being obedient to what God's called you to do? Okay, number 3, instilling humility, just like with the manna. It's trying to get people to understand this. One, this isn't about you. Be humble in the sense that you don't have pride in thinking you did something about it. It was done for you, and you're thankful for it, okay? Reminding the Israelites of their sinful nature, not their promised nationality. And if it wasn't for them, it wasn't for the Israelites. It was about God's promise to bring about the Messiah, okay? This promise had been way before, all right, in the past, starting with Abraham. And then 4, establishing obedience. Just like with our salvation, if you don't take care of it, you will lose it. Yes, we don't believe in once saved, always saved on this channel, okay? This establishing obedience, and I told you in chapter 8, for instance, there's 5 different times where obedience is required, or else, okay? And again, the Bible, You can, if you want to read it a certain way, you eisegete into what you want it to say. Okay. But 5 times just in the last chapter alone, do this or else. All right. That's pretty clear to me. Now, oh, that was Old Testament. The Bible doesn't change. God's laws, Levitical law and ceremonial law and all that stuff, that's different. But God telling you to obey, now all of a sudden with Christ, we don't have to obey. God forbid is what Paul says in Romans 6:15. What shall we do? Shall we sin? For we're not under the law, but under grace. God forbid. Far from it. Okay. Paul is saying you can't just continue to sin just because you know what grace is. All right. That's not how this works. Obey or else. The Bible's riddled with that. Okay, Deuteronomy 9:1, getting into the message, the original message anyway. Listen, O Israel, today you're about to cross the Jordan River to take over the land belonging to nations much greater and more powerful than you. They live in cities with walls that reach to the sky. Okay, so moving from the wilderness to the promised land, and you can contrast this a lot of different ways, but commonly slavery in Egypt is compared to our walk nowadays, modern life, your personal life. Slavery in Egypt is like when you're lost in sin. Okay, transitioning from Egypt to the wilderness, all right, is the justification aspect in being justified by Christ for what he did. All right. But again, that doesn't save you. There's 3 parts to your salvific walk. All right. That first part is justification, being free from sin and knowing what Christ has done for you. Second part, walking in the wilderness to the promised land, your struggle from the wilderness going to the promised land and also getting rest in the promised land, conquering what God has given you to conquer. All right. That's your sanctification period. That's what we're dealing with after we're saved until we die. Okay. And then you have an exile possibility. A lot of people keep this one out. All right. But the exile rebellion from resting in the promised land. You're in the promised land, but guess what? When the Israelites went into the promised land, their lives weren't done. The conquest wasn't over. They still had issues. They still had problems. They still had to obey, even though they were saved and they were given what they were promised. They still had to obey or else they would lose it. Okay. And just like with our spiritual walk, if you don't obey, you will lose it. You can lose it. All right. The exile is the best example of once saved, always saved isn't a possibility because the Israelites were saved. All right. They were promised the promised land. They were given the promised land, but they didn't maintain the promised land. Okay. So the exile part. And then the last part is death. Obviously, death in their lifetime and our lifetime, that's the glorification aspect. So you have justification, sanctification, glorification, the 3 parts of your salvific walk. But there is an exile portion in there that if you're not careful, if you don't obey, if you don't continue in what God commands you to do, you can get into trouble, just like the Israelites did. We're kicked out of the promised land, which is supposed to be an example of our salvation. Okay. The promise from God, the covenant from God. All right. And the covenant from God, the promise of that was given to their ancestors was taken away from them because of their disobedience. Obviously, the hardest part in a Christian's walk is that sanctification period. All right. If you think of it in this context, when you're a slave in Egypt, in your sin, you're a slave to sin. You don't even know that there's something better. You just know that there's something wrong. Sometimes you don't even know it's wrong. And after you're saved, there's people just like the Israelites wanted to go back to Egypt. You want to go back to your sin. It was an easier time. We've all dealt with that early on in our walk. But once you get saved, everything is really easy at the beginning because you're on fire for God. It's the Ephesus church in Revelation, the first church of Revelation. You're on fire. It's your first love. You're ready to do anything. You're ready to die for God. You're doing all this stuff. Okay. Why? Because just like with the Exodus, everything was happening supernaturally for them. They weren't having to fight at all. Okay. They weren't having to run for their lives. They weren't having to conquer anything. God took care of everything. God gave them the plagues to the Egyptians. He made Pharaoh let them go. All right. Think about this. When you're first saved, it's a little bit easier. Okay. It doesn't get harder till after that initial phase. Ronnie used to say this all the time about how, he used to say a story about Derek, I think, and how he had a dream saying like, do you love your kids less now that they're not crawling and you don't have to take care of them like they're an infant? And of course, Ronnie's like, well, no. And so he says, well, get up and walk. All right. It's time to walk. It's time to eat solid food. It's time to get off the milk. All right. The Exodus time period of our salvation where we get saved and we're free of sin and we're on fire for God and everything is just great. Okay. And we want to tell people about it. We want to tell them how great this thing is. Okay. And that's why you're not supposed to just preach from an early standpoint because you don't have the mindset of what a person walking in sanctification is dealing with because everything you're on fire. And that's what I'm convinced there's a lot of people who become saved right away and they want to start preaching at people. And I'm not saying not to, Paul preached right away. All right. There's a lot of people who try to preach at people and throw the Bible at them. They become Bible thumpers and all that stuff, but they haven't dealt with their own sanctification walk yet. They're just in the justification period. Okay. And I don't know how long that lasts for everyone, but I hope you understand what I'm saying here. That justification period where you are, walking so closely with God and you're just on fire and you just can't understand how anyone else can't see it this way. Okay. And I'm not saying you need to be careful or not preach the word, all right? But you can scare people off a lot easier during that time period. And I know, I know for sure I did. But when you become in the sanctification period, now God has said, get up and walk on your own. Now it's time to eat meat on your own. Now it's time to dive in the word, study. I'm not just going to give you anything. I'm not just going to give you everything anymore. Okay. The transitioning from the Exodus, getting out of Egypt through the wilderness where God took care of everything for you. Even I mean, compare this, any war, any army, any country that they came across, God handled it. They didn't have to do much. They didn't have to change their shoes. God gave them food. It was like nursing a child, nursing a baby with milk. God did everything. Now that they're moving into the promised land, now it's time to be sanctified. You're having to do this, this, and this. You have to obey or else. You have to walk. You have to do this. Get up, eat meat. Okay. It compares both ways. And once you get into this time period, that's the hardest part. All right. That's the point behind all this. The easiest part is the justification part. You're on fire. You don't know anything but God's love. Okay. But when that fades, and now it's your responsibility to continue in what God's called you to do. So many people, I think about the 4 different types of seed in Matthew 13. I mean, some scattered across, some seeds fell on a footpath and the birds came and ate them. Okay. Other seeds fell on shallow soil with underlying rock. The seeds sprouted quickly because the soil was shallow, but the plant soon wilted under the hot sun. So that's your one, you're on fire and it's taken away before you can get on fire. 2, the one I'm talking about, the one that relates to the justification period. Okay, the seeds fell on shallow soil and they sprouted quickly because the soil was shallow. So you're on fire. You show. I mean, you're excited, but because you haven't been rooted yet, the plant soon wilted under the hot sun. Think of it this way: I'm in my justification period, and I'm gonna go and spread the gospel. I'm gonna go, and be real bold about it. Well, the heat comes from all the oppression from the people, and you're not prepared. You haven't prepared yourself for it. You don't even know the word yet. You're on fire, okay? But it's easy to get shot down and shouted down. All right, if you're not careful. Okay, other seeds fell among the thorns and grew up and choked out the tender plants. Okay, are you still hanging around with the people that you're not supposed to be hanging around with? The people who want to choke Christ out of your life. Okay, are you staying in a relationship you shouldn't be in? And I'm not talking about marriage. That's covenant. That's different. Are you in a relationship that's going to choke you out? All right, when you're trying to change your life. Okay, and then the last one, there's 4 different types of seed. The last one's the one that grows, that gets roots. Okay, that's sanctified through the heat, through the oppression, through the attacks. Okay. Hardest part is that sanctification time. God's preparing them for this in verse 1. All right. You're gonna cross into this land. And these people are bigger. They're more powerful than you. They have big cities. They're walled cities. Back then a walled city meant it was impenetrable, right? That's why we hear the story of Jericho and we think, what's the big deal with that? That huge walled city that they could fit houses in the walls. The walls were so thick. That's why it's such a big deal. That's supposed to be an impenetrable fortress. And it wasn't. Okay. But just like with the seeds, the first seed, the second seed, people will want to long for Egypt. Why is Moses explaining this to the Israelites? You're about to deal with this because they have for 40 years wandered and wanted to go back to Egypt. Okay. Things are going to start to get hard. They want to go back. All right. Even though God was providing for them throughout the 40 years. Okay. Verse 2. The people are strong and tall, descendants of the famous Anakite giants. You've heard the saying, who can stand up to the Anakites? All right. These giants, the ones that came, Goliath, those huge 9-foot tall, 13-foot tall. I don't remember some of the descriptions in the Bible. Okay, but big and tall enemies. God takes some things off our plate. Again, you get justified. God takes some things away. All right, and He helps you. One, to me, it's to know supernaturally that He's there. Okay, and again, anyone in their justification time period, when you got saved and born again, God's there because you can't explain some things except for a supernatural thing that happened. All right. But He'll take some things away, but He leaves some things to conquer. And I fully believe the Anakite giants, because of what happened, Coach Shelby preaches on this all the time, the 10 and the 2, Joshua and Caleb, they were bold and they knew God gave this victory to them. We're going to go take care of it. But the 10 weren't. And so many of us are timid and scared to go forward with what God has already promised us. We as coaches, we'll sit there and we'll prepare and we'll commit to something. We'll be disciplined about it. We'll try to discipline the kids and we'll do all this stuff for an unknown outcome. We don't know the outcome of the game. We prepare to win, but we don't know the outcome. However, when it comes to our faith, are you preparing your kids for the outcome that will happen? Are you preparing them for eternity? Because we know what's going to happen. We know the victory's already happened. We know God will help us with this, but we won't go forward because we're afraid of something. God has called you. If you're a coach, God has called you to reach those students. Okay, so what are you doing with your calling? What are you doing with your talent? Or are you burying it in the ground because you're worried about what someone will say? Okay. Why it was important for them to face the Anakites, again, because of what they dealt with before. Joshua and Caleb, the only 2 bold ones of the 12 tribes. All right, this was the Israelites' cross to bear, so to speak. Again, in your justification walk, things are taken away, but as you're in your sanctification walk, God will leave your cross to bear, whatever that is. Okay. He'll leave you that thorn in the flesh. Okay. So that we lean on him to get through these things. If he took away every issue in our lives, would we ever pray to him again? If he took away everything? No, he allows things to stay in our lives so that we will lean on him, so that we will turn to him, because he knows that's what's best for us. He doesn't do it for himself. He doesn't need anything. We need him. Okay. And he knows, because we're human and stupid, that if we got everything we needed, we would never need him again. We would never turn to him again. So then when something did happen, when the heat came, right, when the winds came, when the sand shifted, we wouldn't know where to turn. Okay. And because he didn't save us from something, we don't turn back to him. All right. Again, the whole theme of this is it's undeserved blessings. You've got everything you've ever needed because of what Christ did at the cross. Everything else is undeserved, because what we do deserve is to go to hell. Okay. The Anakim were the thorn in the Israelites' side. So God leaves this thorn for them to deal with as part of their walk and transformation and justification. Same reason we continue to struggle with things. Okay. Who can stand against Anak? All right. Caleb and